Did you hear that? There you go. We are now recording, I think. Boom. Hello. I don't know how we're going to send it when we record it, but there you go. We'll work that out later.
Exactly.
But did you get a chance to look at the videos?
I I watched half of it, and that's it. I only watched half. I also didn't want to spoil, so that's why.
Okay. Yeah. Did you watch it as
Um,
well?
well, I watched the introduction one and then I started to watch the other one, but I wasn't able to finish. But I want to catch up by next week.
That's okay. You're doing good. I mean, we had that conversation a few months ago when you were here. So this one's the easy one for you because you've heard it all before. And we're going to talk about men and animals. We're just like animals, aren't we? We're just the same. That's what some people suggest. And the suggestion's a recent one. It's not traditional. Um, in the beginning, for thousands of years, people have known that we are more than animals. And yet, maybe 200 years ago, maybe people thought we're just animals. We're just the same. We're more evolved animals. Where do you think those ideas come from? What gives people that idea? What would make people start thinking that we might be evolved animals? But
I'm not quite sure.
um, I, I,
I think
yeah, go ahead.
I'm just saying if everything around us, not everything, but if the things that are more similar to us are animals, then we must be as well.
Okay, so there's similarities, right?
Hmm.
What are the similarities between people and animals?
We breathe, we eat, we drink, we sleep, we are alive.
Yeah, we move, we communicate, and so we can see intelligence, we can see connections. The animals do certain things, and we do them too. And so we're obviously more animal than plant to some people. And they seem to have the idea that maybe we could have just become a better version of other animals, right? That's their thought, right? There are many animals. Maybe we just got better, and they compare animals to each other. Okay, so they'll compare a cat to a dog, and then they'll compare that to a lizard or a fish or a cow, and they'll look at them all. Sorry, that was very Northern Irish. Cow. Um, that they'll look at them all and say, well, they all eat, and this one is smarter than that one, and this one is better at this than that one, and they can compare animals, and they think, well, if you put us in that group, there are some similarities, right? But the main reasoning behind it is the desire for there to be no God. Okay, if there's a God, then he creates. He creates everything individually because he's creative and he does that. If there's no God, where did people come from? Any thoughts? Because this is the big problem the world had. Okay, if you want to reject God, well, then where do we come from? And that's the difficult question people are left with. If there's no God, then we must have come from somewhere. How did we come about? If somebody didn't make us, then we can't make ourselves. We have to have developed somehow. And that's the only suggestion that people could come up with. So obviously the most obvious exponent of that was Charles Darwin, right? But you can look at some of the people that went before him and some of the people that went after him that sort of said, right, okay, we must have come from somewhere. We're a bit similar to some animals. And you've seen the picture of the monkey turning into a man. Do you know the steps? And even Darwin didn't draw it that way. That evolution of man um, even evolutionists will say, well, there must have been lots of cross barriers and things that didn't work, and it wouldn't have been a straight flow from one thing to another. And yet, one of the biggest issues is there's no evidence at all of any of those missing links. There are none. There are a handful of skeletons that people have uncovered and said, oh, this must be Neanderthal man, right? The different terms for it you've heard, right? The idea of a missing link, a man who wasn't quite a man, but wasn't quite a monkey. He's somewhere in between. And when you start looking at them, so they found one, oh, there's one in Australia. It's got a man and he's got a real strong jaw and a different shape of head. And then they found out the jaw's actually from a different animal. It just happened to be buried in the same pit, but it was actually a donkey's jaw or something like that. And that's why it looked different. Some of the other skeletons they found have similar issues, that it's not the same person, or the man has some bone disease and that's why his head sticks out, and it doesn't date from whenever they think it dates from. It's only a few years old, and all these other issues that people have had. And if you try and look up missing links on Google, you'll see there's a lot of just basically there's only a handful of skeletons they've found, and most of them have been disproved already. And the question then is, so people are desperate to say we're not created. That's what they're desperate for. They want this, what they want to look like we're not created. Why do you think people don't want us to be created? Did I ask this last week?
So we don't have moral responsibilities, maybe?
Yeah, that's what it comes down to. If nobody made me, then I don't owe anything to anyone. Right? I'm God if nobody else is. I'm God of my world if nobody else is. And that's what people want. People want to run their own lives. That was the original sin with Adam and Eve. The first thing they did was say to God, no, we'll run our own lives. We'll run our own lives. And that's the problem. But so people really want that. That's what they're looking for. And the problem is that they end up with very debatable and very confusing ideas. And there are issues with it. If you'd watch the video back to front, and no, back to front wouldn't work. But the second half of the video is about what the issue is with men not being animals. Why would it be an issue if men were just evolved animals? What's the issue there? What's the problems?
I think we wouldn't evolve. We wouldn't develop a morality. I don't think that makes any sense.
Yeah.
From stuff that I watch and some videos, it actually doesn't make any sense that we would develop morality, because if the objective is to survive, I would do anything to survive. Not,
Yes.
I won't see killing someone as wrong. It's just something to achieve my goals.
Yes. Morality is non-evolutionary, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't help evolution. And the problem is if man is just treating one another like an animal, then we take morality out of the question, and that allows all kinds of problematic behavior. I'll give you an example. Here in Scotland, they rewrote the curriculum on sex education about 5 years ago. And the man they got to rewrite it was a doctor. And he said, I don't understand why sexuality has been taken away from children. Everybody should have sexuality. And it is wrong that we've taken sexuality out of the curriculum and out of schools. And so his part in writing the curriculum was to put sexuality back into schools. But he was writing the curriculum for primary schools, for 5 years old, for 7 years old, for 9-year-olds. and he wants them to be sexual. I don't get it. It's wrong. Children are not allowed to be children, and there should be no sexuality for a 5-year-old. And his moral position is, well, we're just animals. Why, when animals just have sex, why do we say, no, you have to wait till you're mature, you have to wait till you're older? You know, it's silly. And what he is he's a dirty man, and his desire is to abuse children. And it's scary because that's who the government employed to write our curriculum. And if we say people are just animals, then we treat each other like animals, and that means abuse, right? And we allow abuse. As I said before, one of the groups that used the stuff that Darwin wrote were the Nazis. They're saying, right, well, if we can evolve past other men, then we can treat them badly. We can treat the Jews badly because they haven't evolved as far as we have. That was their understanding. The same with our apartheid in South Africa. I lived in South Africa for a couple of years as a boy during apartheid, and they said black people are not as evolved as white people. So we don't need to treat them the same. In the Hindu religion, they do the same on religious grounds, right? We are a higher caste than you. We were born better than you, so we can treat you however we like. And because you must have done something wrong in a former life, deserve to be as rubbish as you are. And so we can treat you however we want. And people abuse whatever they can to say, well, I'm important. You're not. There we go. I win. And that's the issue. So I think that the issues for me, if I can show you the notes, did you download the notes?
Yeah.
No. Okay, so on the website, the notes look like this for this. Can you see that? Not yet, not until I share the screen. You share screen. How do I share screen? Ah, there's the button. These ones. Okay, you can see that. Okay, at the end, we're talking about here. What concerns are there of treating man as an animal? And we're talking about the fact that that allows people to abuse others. If we're just animals, we can abuse others, but it also leads to devaluing, right? If I see you as created in God's image, then I should treat you like you're created in God's image. I should treat you well. If I think you're made from dirt and you're going back to dirt and really you're no different from dirt, well, then I can treat you like dirt. Isn't that how it works? So there are some big issues with treating each other like animals. So let me ask you the question then: what evidence is there that we're different?
I think it's the morality.
Morality is one, yeah. Do you know what's interesting as well? That's another side to that. Immorality is also a sign that we're different.
Yes, the thing that we can distinguish good from bad.
Not only just distinguish good from bad, but choose to do bad,
Or good.
which is a unique kind of choice set that we have. Okay, so I know it's wrong to slap people, but sometimes I still do. And you know, mostly Ola deserves it, but you know, not always.
I actually have a question about this topic. I was in college and I started talking with this young man, and we started talking about God, and morality came to the conversation. And I actually said that if there is no God, there wouldn't be any morality. And for example, I know that killing someone is wrong. And then he said, there's people from third world countries that are killing since they're a child. So, and probably they can't distinguish that is wrong. I actually think that they know that is wrong, but maybe they their minds have been perverted. Maybe I don't know if that's something.
There's not much in history of people blatantly killing without reason. You know, those tribes that live out. What's interesting when you find, you know, over centuries we've encountered tribes for the first time, and all of them have a moral code. It might be different. They might kill outsiders, they might kill enemies, but they don't kill each other for nothing. There are some that would cannibalize, but very few. And even there, they would cannibalize as a necessity rather than as a normal choice. And again, they would rather eat their enemies than their friends, right? There isn't a lot of evidence. I don't know, you could do a lot more research on it and see. I don't think there's very much evidence of people without some moral code. Even people like it is interesting when you go to a tribe that's never met people before. I was trying to think what the tribe in was it Bolivia that Elizabeth Elliot and Jim Elliot went to, but they killed Jim Elliot and his friends just for trying to help, just for going. And yet when they encountered them later, they had a moral code. They had an understanding of right and wrong. They had a bigger idea of morality. It was very different, maybe. All our views of morality are not exactly the same. But there tend to be common threads such as protection of the weak, right? Most different societies still have an idea of that. The idea of the sanctity of human life, as you say, killing somebody is wrong. There are usually some measure of sexual codes in societies wherever they are. Despite the fact that sexuality is the first and most obvious thing that gets abandoned in morality. Let's have sex with whoever we want to, woohoo, right? Because I want to, woohoo. But yet so I don't think there is as much evidence as he might have thought. I don't know if he could name some tribes or things like that where there wasn't a moral code as they were even before they met the white men or whatever. I think most do.
When he talked about this, the first thing that came to my mind was, for example, people like the Taliban or something, that they teach their kids since a really young age to kill other people, for example, in the name of their religion. But maybe they still think that is wrong killing, for example, their own ones, killing those that are with them. So
I grew up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, and there was an organization called the YCV, and men took young boys and trained them to be young citizen volunteers. Basically, they taught them to attack people and to burn cars and to murder. And that was how they fed the paramilitary organizations. But they knew that it was wrong, and they were doing it to protect their own from the evil enemy, which is an underlying cause under most murder, I think. Not in every case, obviously, but in the majority of wars and things, there's an idea of protecting yourself to attack the other. So I think there is a lot. I mean, this has been a debate with like Russia invading Ukraine, right? Where's the morality in it? Ukraine didn't attack them. They weren't oppressing their people, although sometimes that's what the Russians will say. There are our people inside Crimea or inside this area of Ukraine, and they're being oppressed, and they want to be part of Russia, so we attacked Ukraine. The evidence isn't there to back up their story, but do the soldiers just do what they're told? Are they thinking morally? Those are good questions. Morality is an interesting question. So did you get any further in your debate with him?
Actually, I started. I had to go home, and I started getting a little frustrated. So stuff. I didn't leash out. I think I can say it. But we after a little bit we stopped the conversation. But I sent him a video about the basically explaining God and the creation of the world as free engineers that created a simulation, and it's pretty interesting.
Can you
Well,
send me that video after?
Sure.
If you look at any of the apologetics, do you know what apologetics is? So people who do apologetics are trying to debate with the world about creation, about whether creation or evolution are true, trying to show that what God says fits with what we see. So what they try and do is say, well, the Bible says this, and here's how we can see that that is true. And they debate with evolutionists and they argue. So Richard Dawkins, have you heard his name? He is a famous evolutionist. He is one of those who has all the big debates and has conversations with people saying there is no God. We've killed God. The idea of God is gone. We don't need God. And then people will, but he has debates with people, and usually loses spectacularly. One of the people he debates with is called John Lennox. I don't know if I have the books with me. Give me a. Oh no, they're at the church. I took them back. I have a book. I think it's called Being Truly Human. It's by David Gooding, who was a professor at Queen's, and John Lennox. And John Lennox is a professor of mathematics, I think, in Oxford, in England, and he debates with people about evolution, and he likes to have these conversations and say, well, the evidence does show that there's a God, not that there's no God. The evidence shows design, not randomness. Design suggests there's a God. The evidence shows morality, not immorality. Morality shows there's a God. Evidence shows beauty. Beauty suggests there's a God, right? Not meaninglessness, and so on. And they'll have these big debates. So apologetics is the Christian debating team, essentially, around the world. People who like to debate about Christian things and to talk to those who aren't Christians and trying to reason with them about the faith. I don't really enjoy apologetics. I would get frustrated before you would. And because to me the evidence is so clear. I get that people can't see it, but I also don't get it. The Bible says their eyes are blind. They're just not seeing. And to me, it seems like people are totally blind. The evidence is all there, So I do understand your frustration. I get it, and I would also get frustrated. Having an answer doesn't mean you need to give the answer to everybody else. Does that make sense? So if you know that something makes sense, that it's truthful, that it's factual. That doesn't mean you need to force that view on everybody else or tell everybody else. What to skip slightly sideways from the conversation, but what is it that convinces people to follow Jesus? Any ideas, Ola? What makes people want to follow Jesus?
I'll say from my experience, I think his love.
Right, okay. Love,
Me.
The Holy Spirit.
right? The Holy Spirit has to move, yeah. And what happens is they see evidence in other people, right? Doesn't mean anything until the Holy Spirit brings it home. What's the most obvious evidence in other people? What is it that makes them want to change? What's the evidence that they see in Christians that makes them want to change?
Maybe the way they act. For example,
What do you mean about what way they act?
patience, maybe with people being more open. More open, not in the sense that we won't let anything happen, but not not get frustrated so easily with people. Being more spreading more love, I guess. I don't know. I know that there's this thing that it's just love, but love is also it has limits. It's not. It can be tolerant of everything. So
Yeah.
it's
Well, love wants the best for people, right? And that doesn't mean you let them away with everything. Okay? If you want the best for your children, you don't just let them do whatever they want. It doesn't mean you harm them, but you correct them, you train them, you rebuke them, because they need that. They need direction as well. So love doesn't let people away with everything. It is not soft. Love makes hard decisions as well. But there's an interesting. Any thoughts, Ola? What makes people
I
want
was
to?
gonna say, just the fruit of the Spirit, right? So love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, self-control. I think when there are situations in which the opposite of those would be so obvious, yet they're not as impulsive to us, I think people can tell that something is different. You know, like when we have peace in a situation that nobody else would have peace in, or when we're able to, I don't know, have joy in really, really different circumstances. I think that makes us stand out as Christians.
Yeah. I'll finish this conversation in a wee minute. I'll get us to look up a Bible verse. But when we're talking about what makes man different from animals, it's not the intelligence of Christians that strikes other people, right? It's not their morality. It's not that we're more moral than other people. Sometimes we're not, which is sad. We should be. It's not the behavior so much as one thing that stands out, and that's hope. Right? Have you got a Bible there this time? You got your Bible? 1 Peter 3. 1 Peter 3. I want to know what your Portuguese version says, if you can translate it for me, because I struggle with the English translation here because they changed it, and I don't like what they've changed it to from what they changed it from. So I want you to read to me 1 Peter 3 and the second half of verse 14. Okay.
It says, I'm gonna try to just
Yeah.
translate it on the fly. Don't fear the threats of men and don't let yourselves be disturbed.
Okay. It used to say, do not fear what men are threatened by. Okay? Do not fear what they fear. Now my version says the same. Do not fear their threats. But I think the first version is better. Peter is telling people to be good, right? And he says, even if you do good, nobody is going to want to harm you for doing good. But even if they should, don't fear them, right? Even if you're blessed, you're still blessed if people attack you, right? That's what it says in the verse before. And it says, do not fear their threats, or do not fear what they fear. Do not be disturbed or frightened. Okay. And then it goes on to say in verse 15, read 15 for me then.
15 says, and in your hearts honor Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to answer to anyone who questions you about the hope that you have.
Right. Anyone, in my version, it says anyone who asks for the reason for the hope that you have. Right. Asks for the reason, questions you is similar. But what astounds people is not your intelligence or your morality, it's your hope. Okay. And hope as opposed to fear. Fear is the alternate perspective to hope. How would you describe fear? Simplify it for me.
The unknown?
Well, why would you fear the unknown? What does it mean to fear the unknown?
Well, usually our fears come from a rational point of view because we don't know something. For
Yes.
example, I'm going on a dark alleyway. I'm going to be scared because I don't know what's beyond.
Okay, so what it's about is, first of all, we imagine the worst, right? Essentially, fear is not knowing something and imagining bad things that could happen. Yeah. Fear comes from so if you're afraid of heights, I don't think it's not sensible, but you stand at the top of a tall building and you think, I could fall off this and I would go down there and I would die, right? You imagine the worst. So fear is looking at something and imagining the worst. Okay? Or imagining the bad, not necessarily the worst, but the bad side of things. So spiders, why are people afraid of spiders? Because they imagine the spider could bite you, or they imagine the spider climb in your mouth, or whatever makes them, or crawls over you. All the pictures of uh, fear are about imagining the worst. What does hope do then?
Imagines the best.
Yeah, it looks at the unknown and imagines the possibilities, imagines what could be, what God could do with this, right? And so essentially the contrast, I think, in verse 14 is better when it says, do not fear what they fear, but then be ready to answer when people say, why have you got hope? I've got fear. Why have you got hope? I've got fear. Okay, so I don't know if you know anybody who's in hospital with cancer. I do. But I know the difference between them and the people in the same room sitting around. And because they are all afraid of what could happen. Very real possibilities of death, of pain, of horrible life to come. But the person I know knows that if they die, they're going to heaven. That if this is it, it's okay. Does that make sense? And so they will be asked, but it happens every time Christians go to hospital. That's where they're most powerful, because they don't have fear, they have hope. So hope is probably the most significant thing about being a Christian. In terms of evolution, it doesn't change evolutionary ideas. But it's God's way. God hopes. God looks for the possibilities. So when God created man, he was thinking of the possibilities, not the problems. When he gave man the free will and the choices, God was thinking of what man could choose when he chooses him. That's love. Not what could happen if he didn't choose him, which is hatred, which is sin. Does that make sense? So hope is the most amazing thing, and it's a God thing. But people have this amazing ability to imagine. Animals just don't. Animals don't fear and they don't hope. Right? That's not them. They're not taking over the world. I've seen pictures of like a bear sitting, staring off into the sunset. Do you know what I mean? But it's so unreal. It's like, oh, how amazing is that? And I'm like, it's probably sitting there. It's probably been fishing all day in the river and it's knackered and it's just sat down to breathe for 5 minutes. It's not imagining what's out there and what the stars mean. I was having this conversation with somebody this week about what the stars mean. You know, that God made the stars. And I said, he made them for us to watch. He made them so that we could imagine how big his universe is, and therefore how big God must be to hold the universe in his hands. The heavens stretch to hold God. And when we see the size of the universe and we see the stars, and people get amazed by the black holes and the light years and the just the amazing things that go on in the universe. And God made them to make us surprised. And somebody said, oh no, they must have a bigger purpose than that. And I'm like, well, that's a pretty big purpose, right? To make us think bigger. That's quite amazing of God. I don't know if there's other reasons for stars. Maybe he made other stars for fun. Maybe he made them to wander around sometimes. I don't know. But imagining that is not something animals do. Asking that question is not something animals do. So we'd have to have developed imagination in a way that animals, it's not like we've developed a better imagination. It's a completely different kind of imagination. It's not like what they do. So that's quite cool. I think we're quite spectacular with our weird imagination. I don't know what you'll imagine tonight, or more to the point, dream. Dreams are pretty spectacular as well. That our brains keep thinking while we're asleep and conjure up ideas. I used to write songs in my sleep, and I'd wake up and I'd think, oh, I better write down those lyrics, and I'd write down those lyrics, and then in the morning I'd look at them and go, that's terrible. What was I thinking? Right? We have so many great ideas that aren't great ideas, and so many notions of what's going on that aren't. It's quite an amazing psychology we have. We have thousands of people every year studying psychology at university, and they will never grasp a small part of what's really going on in our brains at all. It's quite amazing. So let's keep going then with other ideas of things that make humans different from animals.
I remember when I was there, we talked about writing, which I thought was quite spectacular. So animals don't write, don't have history museums, this notion of, like legacy heirlooms, and
Yeah.
that doesn't exist.
Well, they don't see past their face, right? If I want to eat something, I eat something. If I want to have sex with something, I have sex with something. If I want to sleep, I sleep. That's the world of animals, right? If I want to play, I play. And then we go, but I want to be remembered. I want my children and my children's children to remember me. I want them to have ideas of how important I was and how significant I am in the universe. So I'm going to record stuff. And I was saying to Ola when she was here, they started recording. If you look up when they started writing in different places, in China, they started in the 3rd century BC. Not 3rd century, between 2000 and 3000 BC, 3rd millennium BC. Does that make sense? In Sumeria, in Mesopotamia, they started writing between 2000 and 3000 BC. In Egypt, they started writing hieroglyphics between 2000 and 3000 BC. All the writing that we have began about 3000 BC, and yet was invented in several different places. If you take cave paintings, and don't assume that the carbon dating that they've done on cave paintings is correct, because there's plenty that screws up carbon dating. But if you take cave paintings as another idea of somebody recording their great feats, I mean, I have no reason to believe that the cave paintings need to be older than 3000 or 3000 BC either. So we have all these people learning to write, recording their histories around the same time. And you think, well, did they learn from each other? No, they didn't have any connections. They separated. That's another thing that makes it interesting. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the fact that they have histories that all start around the same time suggests that man's history starts around the same time as well. Because these histories are in different places, in different languages, but they all start at a similar time. And men have this just desire to be remembered, this psychological need to be important. So yeah, give me a little thought on language here. Any thoughts on why we would develop loads of different languages?
So there's the, go ahead.
I was going to say that weren't we trying to build a giant tower and then God just made us don't understand each other or something? I'm not sure.
Yeah. Okay, so that's true. That's what the Bible says. And because it says the purpose for different languages is actually confusion, right? Evolution has no value in many different languages. A universal language would be better, right? We're trying to get towards a universal language. Thankfully, the most common one is English, because I'm really bad at learning languages. It's not that I don't want to learn Portuguese, I'm just really terrible at learning languages. But we have this kind of idea that universal language means we can all communicate. But why then is there many different languages? Because evolution says that would be crazy, right? It's not helping us evolve. It's distracting us. It's separating us. It's weakening the species. The only suggestion in evolution is that we evolved in many different places at the same time, which is just crazy. Evolutionary wise, that's just nuts. Otherwise, separating languages is really unhealthy. I'll give you an example. This is weird. It's not an example of language, but it's a weird of separating things. In Scotland, there are many clans, you know that? Families that go back, and you can trace your ancestry back to the clan that you came from about 500 years ago. So they look at all the different families that were here in Scotland 500 years ago, and they call them clans, these big families. And then they say, well, there are different clans here and there and everywhere, and they're all and some of the big clans fought with other big clans, and then they wiped out some of the smaller clans. And you have an island in Scotland called Lewis, okay? And a family, I think, ran away from some of the other clans and started their own little group on this island and called it Lewis. There's an island called Harris, okay? And again, a family, the Harris family, ran away from the mainland and started their own little clan on this island. And actually, both of them are the same island. But the two families, the two clans, now tribes, refuse to admit that the other one exists. I mean, they both run away to this one island. One went to one end, one went to the other end, and they pretend like the other sides don't exist. It's really the bizarrest thing. So you go to Harris and you say, "Oh, I'd like to try your Harris tweed or your Harris gin," and then you think, "Right, what about Lewis?" No idea what you're talking about. No, doesn't exist. And they're so bent on being separate. It's so weird, and it's just so stupid, and it doesn't make sense. So people are a complete mess. That's one of our issues. And one of our issues about being a complete mess is that we want our own way, and we don't admit other people exist sometimes if they want a different way. We separate ourselves and do our own thing, and yet evolution says all of that is madness. The best way for a species to evolve is unity and togetherness, and yet we do the opposite. There's lots of things we didn't touch on the idea of beauty. The fact that we find things beautiful. I think evolution says beauty has a place, right? If you want your species to grow, you need to find your partner attractive. However, we find the sky and mountains and water and other animals. I said other animals. We find animals attractive. We find beauty in flowers. There is no value in us finding flowers attractive. Flowers are attractive apparently so that bees find them attractive. But bees don't even really see what we see. We see how beautiful they are. And we like flowers. There's a lot of trees and things all over the world that we find stunning and attractive. We find beauty in snowflakes and in rainfall and in sunshine and in the way the light hits the sky and makes different colors, the way that we see the ocean. I mean, when was the last time you were beside the sea?
The other week.
Right. What about you?
Maybe past week, maybe. I was
Yeah.
on something.
And what did you think when you looked at it?
I actually, because I go to university by train, sometimes I see the ocean and I don't think much of it, but it's pretty interesting because I saw someone that was actually looking at it, and she wasn't Portuguese, and she was so, I don't know, captivated by the ocean. For me, it's just another thing from my regular day, but she was recording it, even if it was the most common thing ever. It was just a wave hitting the shore. And it actually made me think, wow, I'm really lucky to have this, and actually started looking to the ocean.
I live in a place where people forget how beautiful it is. I mean, it's a really beautiful place, and people forget that. And I've moved here 12 years, and I was driving up the road today, and because it's autumn and the leaves are going gold and brown and yellow and green and orange, and when you're driving up the road and the trees go across the road, it's like this beautiful archway of, and the leaves, when the wind blows, they just flutter and fall down. It's just an amazing thing. And God made it so beautiful. And you're like, well, actually, those trees shedding their leaves, it's kind of a weakness. It's, I mean, they say, right, in terms of evolution, the amount of energy it takes to keep the leaves over the winter is less than the energy they get from the sunlight in the winter. So it's better that they shed the leaves. But that's not really very real. It's not that significant a saving to shed leaves. What it is really beautiful, though. And what it does is it takes all the nutrients from the ends of a tree and plants them back in the earth to feed the next lot of animals and the next lot of trees and the next lot of grass and whatever else is growing out of the compost that comes from all these fallen leaves. And you think about it and you say, well, you know, there it is. It's just a bunch of leaves falling down. And you're like, no, that is designed. That is a beautiful plan. And we enjoy the beauty of it all. And we think about what it means. And that woman that's looking at the ocean isn't just thinking about a wave hitting the shore. She's thinking about where that wave has come from and how far. I studied waves, right? So I know that those waves that hit Portugal have come from Mexico or the Gulf Stream, right? They've moved across thousands of miles of wind blowing has increased the height of the waves in a sinusoidal effect that the wave goes up and down because the wind blows over thousands of miles and it gathers the water and the ripples into waves and it increases those waves and drags them all the way to the shore. And then you just see this burst of energy. That burst of energy comes from the wind. The wind comes from the sun, and the sun seems to be so far away. And yet we see all these amazingly beautiful things. So we're very creative. We understand things that are way beyond what we thought. We don't understand things as well, and we start to question. We start to have ideas about where things come from and questions about what things mean. And all of that says we are something different. Just think of a cat, right? There's TV shows where cats try and take over the world. Okay. And it's daft and it's funny because cats aren't trying to take over the world. They like going out at night and prowling around looking for a mouse to eat. They don't go out at night planning to take over the world. It doesn't make sense. It's not in their psyche. It just doesn't, it's not part of who they are. We have all these grand imaginations and ideas. So, yeah, looking at the ocean, looking at animals, they don't look at us and question whether we have developed from them. I've always felt like dogs are good examples of something that just knows how to be, right? It just runs around, chases its own tail. My gran and granda had a dog that just spun around in circles, trying to bite its own butt. It just kept going round. And it would do this for hours every day, just turning in a circle. It's one little, and it would go for like 3 or 4 seconds and then it would stop and then it would go again. Such a daft little thing, but enjoying itself. The dog was called Taro, not like the tarot cards, it was Japanese. Um, so we have these amazing ideas of what everything means, and animals just do. They just are. They just live. You'll get some people sometimes if you have a debate like that, they'll say, well, animals can do this, right? What are some of the things they claim animals can do that we do?
They have emotions.
right? So yes,
Some
they'll
animals
say,
can have emotions.
yeah, they'll say, oh, they've got emotions too, right? What else?
They can also dream.
Yes, yes, they have dreams. Yeah, yeah.
They have many times like a group behavior. So, like they will take care of the young or feed their family.
Yeah. They'll say animals can use tools. Some animals use tools to make things, so birds collect twigs to make a nest. That animals will, um, scrape things off something to eat, or they'll use something to move stuff around. So they'll say, well, they're just like us, and you think, but they're not. One of the things that gets me often, they'll say, well, they can be um they can be gay. Animals can be gay. I'm like, yeah, but there's no moral question in that decision. There's just a desire to have sex, right? It's not, oh, is this the right thing to do, or is this a bad thing to do? Is this okay? It's just down to a desire to hump anything, probably, right? It's probably not so much homosexuality as just hypersexuality. They'll sleep with anything that's going. And so you see all these kind of behaviors, but they're not out of moral thought or depth or beauty, or there's no imagination or creativity. When animals use tools, they use one tool to do one job,
Mm.
right? What do we do with tools?
We make tools to do other tools to do other things.
Yeah. And we take one tool and use it for a million jobs, some of which are good, some of which are bad, some of which are crazy, right? We take the computer, right? Now, one of the things that amazes me about computers now, nobody can make one. Did you know that? The computer that's sitting in front of you is so complex, right? Somebody has made all the hardware, all the different bits of the hardware are made by different people. I don't even think there's one person who would know how to make all the hardware of your computer, right? All the moldings and all the different pieces, all the chips and all the very fine wiring that goes into the motherboards and things like that. I worked a little bit with processor chips. I mean, they're the most complex wee things, and essentially it's just a bunch of ones and zeros, right? That you program them with, but they get programmed so many times in such a speed. Um, on top of that, nobody knows all the software that's made, right? All the operating systems. I'm sure maybe somebody could make an operating system, but the operating systems that we use are so complex now, that one person couldn't even design the whole operating system. They would run into difficulties. And then this idea of Zoom, somebody else has come up with that, right? Nobody could make all of this. It takes thousands of people to make this tool that you've got sitting in front of you so that we can communicate over, what, 1,000 miles? I don't know how far away Portugal is. 1,500, 1,000,
That sounds about right.
right? When it talks about um, the city of God in the New Jerusalem in heaven, it talks about it being about 1,500 miles long and 1,500 miles wide and 1,500 miles high. That's the city of God. Oh, somebody's behind you. So anyway, but yes, size of Europe and the same height. and that's just the city, and you can go in and out of the city. So it must be somewhere bigger. But yes, technology is amazing, and we create, and we then abuse the technology. We use it for all sorts of wrong things as well as right things. We make moral decisions and then decide to do the immoral thing. Is that all right? Sorry. I was just talking about how amazing technology is. And yet we can do one good thing with it and one bad thing with the same technology. We use the same spoon to eat our ice cream and to pick up poo, right? You know, hopefully not without washing it in between. But you know, these are the sorts of things that happen. And the world is such a complicated thing, and we make it so much more amazingly complicated. And we've designed so many things. Animals haven't changed, like technologically. Think of all the things we've invented in the last 6,000 years, and think what animals have invented in the same period. All the animals between them have invented using a stick to pick something out of a space, or weaving a couple of things together to make something that holds. And we've invented the most weird and bizarre world. We've transformed things. And we use animals to do it sometimes. So there you go. Complex, interesting, creative. And then love and hate and good and evil. We'll have to talk about those things. Both sides show that human beings are spectacular. Right? Animals don't do evil.
Yeah, they're just surviving, I guess.
I mean, they might eat other things, they might kill other things, but they do it for a reason, to survive, to pass on, to feed, right? We have people in the world who do it just because they can, just because they want more land, more control, just because they want other people to do what they say, and if they won't, then they want them out of the way.
I guess I can argue against that because, for example, killer whales, they say that they kill seals just for fun and they start playing with a corpse sometimes. There's this example.
Yeah, I don't think it's morally decided though. I think they're just having fun. Right? So if you put down um essentially animals eat, sleep, uh procreate, and have fun. That's what they're designed for. They can have uses, right? But essentially they're designed to play, to have fun. So I don't think it's outside um the remit to suggest that, yeah, it's a bit nasty of orcas to play with their food, and not even necessarily to finish off what they were, you know, to eat what they started with. But I don't think it necessarily means they've made a moral decision to kill. Ha ha, we're going to get those seals. You know, they're just playing. And playing is part of a design as well. So animals do what they're designed for. As I said, as well as looking down on the animals, we can look up at the angels, more creative, more capable, but not minded the way we are, not inquisitive the way we are, not like challenging the boundaries, or looking at most of the films about angels have them thinking the way we think, because they think they're like we are. But that's not the impression we get from the Bible. In the Bible, they seem to serve the will of God, come and go to do jobs, but they're not thinking, let's try this or let's go and have a go at that. It's always people that come up with the weird suggestions. What angels do you know in the Bible, or what angels do you come across?
Gabriel.
Gabriel comes every time with a message from God. He does what God asked him to do, and then he goes away again. Maybe he's surrounded by another legion of angels singing and praising God, doing what God asked them to do, and then they go away again. There is a weird question about the Nephilim and the angels that come and sleep with women and what's going on there. That's a bit messy. So if you want to have a read at that, I think it's chapter 6 of Genesis, and it's a very bit weird.
Yeah, is that the gods or something that are mentioned? Would that be
Called
angels?
the sons of God, which I think means angels in that context. Have a read at it. It sounds to me like the children of God or the angels come from heaven and sleep with women. But those kind of questions, as I said before, angels seem to do what God asks them to do, and when they can't, they're eternally broken. When they choose to do what God does not want. I think it's chapter 6. Yeah, it doesn't say very much about them. Verse 4 of chapter 6. The Nephilim, Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, the Nephilim were in the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God went to the daughters of men and had children by them. They were heroes of old, men of renown. The Lord saw how great man's wickedness on the earth had become. I think there are different ideas about that. If you read about it, it might take you on a long and very complicated journey to read into the Nephilim and what's going on there. Some people suggest it's not even about angels, but you can have a look at it in your own time. But angels are interesting.
Alan. Sorry,
Yeah.
how do you spell that? Nephilim?
Nephilim.
Okay.
What does yours say? In Genesis chapter 6, verse 4.
It just mentions giants and heavenly beings that had married the daughters of men.
Okay, yeah. So it doesn't. Yeah. So I don't know. The giants were called Nephilim. Nephilim. I don't know really what it means other than what it says there. That's the only mention of them. But some of the people were different. I just don't see the moral code that we have, or the questions that we've got, or the curiosity that we have, or the way we find beauty in bizarre things, our anger, our frustration, our guilt. Guilt's a very weird one. Do you feel guilty about things sometimes? Exactly what is going on there? What is guilt?
Regret.
Okay, so just explain it in more words.
Guilt. Doing something and then having regrets because you did it. Something.
Yeah. Sometimes we regret the consequences. Sometimes we regret the action. Sometimes we regret getting caught. Guilt can mean all of those things. And it's this kind of bizarre thing that I did what I shouldn't do. That requires two things: the knowledge of what right and wrong is, which is nothing like animals. And it also requires the ability to do something we know that is wrong, which is just a very strange thing, right? So if you had the knowledge of right and wrong, surely you would choose to do the right thing, right? That makes sense. Why we would choose the wrong thing, and then worse, we've chosen the wrong thing, and then we feel regret about choosing the wrong thing. We feel bad about choosing the wrong thing when we had the choice to do something and we knew what right was and we knew what wrong was. It's a very strange thing, right? In animals, we don't see anything quite like that. There are animals that have been trained to do something or not do something. And then when they, if you've trained your dog not to poop on the carpet, and then it poops on the carpet, it looks guilty because it knows it's done wrong. It's been trained to do something, and we can train it with guilt. And yet, guilt in humanity can be something we choose to do, and we know exactly what we're doing, and then we still have this weird feeling about it. We still have a regret about it. They are a very strange and complicated set of beings.
So animals wouldn't know that something is right or wrong. They're just programmed to not do something, and they will know what the consequences.
Yes, I think animals can be trained through consequences rather than through morality, if that makes sense. So I don't see guilt in animals. I see animals that look guilty when they've done something they've been trained not to do. But even uh, parent dogs train puppies to do certain things, and will be frustrated with them when they don't do the things they've been trained to do. So we're not the only ones that train them, but in that training, the basis of the training is consequences of actions. We know the consequences of actions, still choose the wrong thing, then feel guilty about choosing the wrong thing, and then either choose to ignore the guilt or change our behavior, all of which is freedom of choice, which is far more complex than animals ever could dream of. So in the notes, I've said I don't want to minimize the value of animals. There's plenty more you can think on this subject. As I said, there's many more things you can look at, people discussing this. I don't want to diminish the value of animals. I want to raise the value of human beings. We have a purpose in the universe that is different from animals. Okay. And we can see that in the Bible. We can see it in Genesis when God said everything was good. And then he makes human beings. And what does he say after that?
It's very good.
It's very good. Right? Everything was designed, everything was played, but there was something missing. And then he puts man in and he says, now it is right. Now it is very good. Now it's what it's supposed to be. Right? Let's have a read. If you've got a Bible, Ecclesiastes. Do you know what that is? I don't know what the Portuguese for it is. Ecclesiastes. Psalms.
Ecclesiastes.
Okay, well there you go. Because weirdly there's an Ecclesiastes in the Apocrypha. Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Do you know this book? No? Okay, this
Yeah.
book was written by open it at chapter 3 and we'll come to the reading in a minute. Have you got it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Ecclesiastes, right in the middle. Psalms,
Okay.
Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. Sorry, my Portuguese is, I'm not even going to attempt. I'm just going to say Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. If you reach Isaiah, you've gone too far.
I found it. Okay.
Okay. This is a book written by Solomon. Solomon was the son of David. He was brought up with all the privileges. He was rich. But God came to speak to him when he just started being a king. And he said to Solomon, what is it I can do for you? What do you want from me? And Solomon asked for wisdom. And God was pleased because he didn't ask for riches or for happiness or for stuff. So God gave him wisdom. And because David, his father, had done so many things that God wanted to do, God promised that when his son became king, there would be peace in the land and it would prosper. And so when Solomon became king, as well as having wisdom, God also gave him riches and lots to do. And Solomon started to think about all of it. And he said, all of this stuff, if you don't include God in the picture, is meaningless, right? And so they call this book the meaningless book sometimes, because he says everything is meaningless. So he starts getting rich and he says riches are meaningless because you can't take it with you. Having all the wealth in the world, which he was the richest man in the world, right? Richest man in the world. What good is that? So then he starts sleeping with people. He has 1,000 wives, right? He's enjoying himself, all the pleasure, but it's empty. There's no depth to it. There's no meaning. It's meaningless. So he starts building things and he creates really interesting buildings and waters, traps and all sorts of cool things. And that's meaningless too. And he's finding it frustrating. Without God, none of this means anything. And so he's questioning a lot of things. But in chapter 3, he comes into a few answers. He says there's a time for everything, right? I don't know if you know the song. There's a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot, a time to kill, a time to heal. Do you know? It's from the 60s. For everything, turn, turn, turn. Do you know the song I'm talking about? No. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. It's just quoting this passage. It's saying there's a time for everything under heaven. There's a time for everything to happen. A man's life is not timeless. Everything is made in a time, and there's a meaning behind time. But then he comes to verse 11. Have you got verse 11? Right, do you want to read it for me?
Oh,
Dali, força.
Chapter
supposed to
3,
know.
verse
Is it supposed to be me reading it?
11. I don't mind. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, translating this.
Yeah.
God made everything really well in the specific time. He even placed eternity in the hearts of men, even if they couldn't understand God's work from the beginning to the end.
Yeah. So that's quite amazing, isn't it? If there's a verse in the Bible to take away to think about how unique man is, it's this. He made everything beautiful in its time. He's made everything beautiful. And yet he puts eternity in the hearts of men. There's something eternal about human beings. We are something other than animals, that eternal idea. And yet we still can't understand all that God's doing. We still don't see the whole picture. We still don't know all that's going on. You see all that in there? And it's saying man is something unique. And actually in if we go down to verse 18, all right. It says, I also thought, as for men, God tests them so that they may see that they are like the animals. Right? He's not saying that we are animals. He's saying we're like the animals. Man's fate is like that of the animals. The same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so dies the other. And so it's saying some of the similarities of man are obvious, right? We share mortality with animals. We share limits with the animals. And but then it says all have the same breath. Man has no advantage over the animal. Everything is meaningless. Again, he's saying things are meaningless. And then he says, all go to the same place. All come from the dust, and to dust all return. And then in verse 21, he says, who knows if the spirit of man rises upwards, and that is his lot? For who can bring him to see what will happen after him? Who shows a man what happens after he dies? Right? And he's saying if without the eternal part, you could maybe say that we're a lot like animals. We have the same limits, but we're something special. Anyway, we've been an hour and a half. I don't want to keep you longer. I do want you to think that people are spectacular. If there's things that remind you of that, then that's good, because it's a great place to start. If you forget that, then there's a lot of places that you can start being abusive or being broken or losing value and losing meaning in yourself and in others. So it's important that we don't just let that run away. But there's lots of comparison between us and animals. And I don't think we look the same. I don't think we're the same. I don't think the things that would need to evolve to create what we've got now would ever have evolved. We just wouldn't have. So there's plenty for you to think about. If you wanted to do some research into what makes man unique, I think you'll find far more than we've talked about today, and far more than there is in the notes. There are lots of people who do that kind of work. So I was saying John Lennox is one you could look up. Another group is a group called Answers in Genesis. They have websites that talk about creation and the evidence for creation. Answers in Genesis, and they're interesting too. But there's lots of people who do talk about stuff like that. Do you feel like you're spectacular?
Depends if I've had one too many drinks, then I feel like I'm very spectacular.
If you've had one too many drinks, you feel very spectacular, or you
Yes.
feel less spectacular?
No, I feel like I'm the spectacularist.
Okay.
Sometimes I feel spectacular, but I see it as a bad thing sometimes because it can lead to pride. I start feeling too good, and then I always try to have humility and say that this only happened because of God and not because of me.
Yes. Well, I think we often compare ourselves to the wrong things. We compare ourselves to each other and not to all of the rest of God's creation. And if our reason for thinking we're spectacular is because we've done something that sets us out from other people, if Novak Djokovic thinks he's spectacular because he's the best tennis player in the world, then when he's too old and is no longer the best tennis player in the world, does that make him not spectacular? He maybe will think that. He'll maybe lose the value, right? Rafa Nadal's retiring this month or next month, and he will feel like he's not who he was before. He's been a tennis player for more than half his life now. He's been a professional tennis player for more than half his life. and they will feel like they're not as valuable as they were before. We're not valuable for what we can do. We're valuable because what God made. And God wants us to feel valuable and to see it in others as well. Not so that we run away from him, but so that we give him glory. Not so that we think we can run our own lives, but that we can thank him for what he's done. It's like the perspectives of hope and fear that we were talking about before. The perspective of putting God in the story and the perspective of not putting God in the story are the two aspects of beginning and looking around at the world. Ecclesiastes has 12 chapters in it. The last chapter begins with the verse, right? If you look at the last chapter.
Remember your creator while you're young, while you don't go through hard times, and in the years to come, you will say, I don't feel like living.
Yes, I don't feel joy in life or pleasure or yes. Remember your creator. Put God in the picture before you face all these troubles and weights and things in the world that weigh you down. And because God says you're meaningful, right? If you come to them after you've decided there is no God, then the weights will feel like terrible weights and things you can't handle. You can handle far more than you imagine. That's what's so amazing. God made you for eternity, and you will have life that you can't even picture or explain. And we thank God because he's the one who is able to do immeasurably more than all you could ever ask or imagine. You know that verse? Ephesians 3:20, that God is able to do immeasurably more than all you could ask or even imagine. This doesn't rely on us being great, it relies on him being great. But he made us special. The world isn't right without us. We're not special because of our gifts, we're special because we're made. And we'll talk about value later. Okay, I've talked way too long. I apologize for that. Hope you've enjoyed it, a chat anyway, and thought through some good things. Any more thoughts on that before we go?
Give me just a second, sorry.
Okay. I doubt Yara wants to watch an hour and a half of us talking, but there you go. She can have it if we
I
can
think
find a way.
she would enjoy it.
I don't know. I'll have to find a way to send it to you. That's the hard part. We'll see. We'll look at a way. We'll work it out. Next time we're going to look at Adam and Eve before the fall, and we're going to think about what that looked like. That sound interesting?
Maybe it's close to what we will go to.
Some people suggest that. I don't think it is. Okay, so we'll have a look at it. We'll think about it. But that's a really good question. That's a really good question. Is that what we're aiming for?
I didn't understand the question, sorry.
You're saying that some people say that's what we're going to be like when we go to heaven. But I don't think it is. We'll talk, we'll see. We'll discuss it. We'll have a look. Because if that's what we were supposed to be like, then why would God have put a tree in the garden if the goal was just to get back to what we were like before the tree was in the garden? Does that make sense? Right? What we have to become has to be something even better than what Adam and Eve were like in the garden. But we'll look at it. I think it's good to look at it. We'll go and we'll start there and we'll have a think about what that looks like. And we'll go, and we'll imagine and we'll think and we'll ponder. And those are things that animals don't do. There you go. Good times. Thanks very much. Any more questions? Did you have any more? Because you haven't been very talkative. I've talked too much.
It's nice to hear you talk.
Good.
You and Reverend Stewie. He was very helpful. Thank you very
Yeah, I
much.
mean, he's not a bad lad, really.
I don't think can I say stuffed animal or will he be offended?
No, that's okay. That's okay. He knows what he is.
Okay. I don't think a stuffed animal has ever seen so many countries as Reverend
Sure
Stewie.
there are. I'm sure there are some people have taken their stuffed animals to like hundreds of countries. I bet you there are. He's only seen like 7 or 8, I think. I mean, that's not loads. So I don't know. But yes, he enjoys himself. He does like a trip. We'll see. He does like a wee road trip. So right, okay.
All
I'll catch
right.
up with you
Thank you
then
so
next
much,
week.
Alan. Have a
Okay,
nice week.
For next week, then you can have a look at the video again if you want. You don't have to, but it's helpful, I think. Gives a good platform, and then we'll talk about Adam and Eve before the fall, and see what that looks like. Is that good?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Alan.
Thank you.
Bye.
Till next
Good to see
week.
both of you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.